Hello everyone and welcome to the Jim Kroft Podcast, where I try to link the worlds of business and creativity. Now it's self-evident in the digital economy that these once separated galaxies are starting to collide. The journey of figuring this out has led me to seek the wisdom of others, and today's special guest, Aishwarya Ashok, embodies this wisdom. I first met Aishwarya on an online course I took last year, run by KP, one of the most cherished guests on this podcast. Every time Aishwarya spoke, I was struck by her ability with the spoken word and quickly became a fan of her podcast, the Founders Foyer. Recognized amongst the top 200 creators on LinkedIn in India, Aishwarya is a visionary product manager, podcaster, and artist. Today, we'll explore how she balances being a mentor and creator, all while nurturing an entrepreneurial spirit. Living at the crossroads of business and creativity, Aishwarya merges solopreneurship and spirituality. How does she navigate these intersections, and what advice does she offer to those exploring similar paths? Her answer left me feeling that every challenge is an opportunity, and every day an unwritten script pregnant with possibility. I believe it will for you too. So let's hear from Aishwarya and her wonderful perspectives on everything from the digital world to the creator economy. Are you ready? Then let's dive in. And we're in, Aishwarya.
Hey Jim, so good to be here. Thank you so much.
You too. I have a bit of a tradition that I confess how I know someone at the beginning of a podcast. So we obviously have a prior connection. So maybe I might just pass it over to you and say, how do we know each other, Aishwarya?
I think it goes back to the Build in Public Fellowship cohort that we met in. So I know I keep saying this, you keep saying this, but all thanks to the rockstar KP for bringing us together, trying to help folks like us who are very passionate about what we do, who generally love chatting about ideas, for us to meet together. I think it's all thanks to that particular seed of bringing us to the cohort. But I absolutely enjoyed getting to know you through the fellowship. It was such a blast in all of our videos. So I'm glad we are here.
It was totally the same for me, and we had the privilege of being asked onto KP's The Build in Public podcast. And I tell you, it was during this podcast, and I was listening, and I was going, Aishwarya is just the most eloquent speaker. And I really mean this. I was just like, wow, you notice it with certain people, with certain ways of articulation. And I was just like, I just love the way you express ideas. And that was actually when I thought, okay, I've got to follow this up and I've got to ask her, mainly because it's also so lovely to get to know someone, when you have that spark. So thank you for being here.
Oh, that's so good to know. Thank you so much for mentioning it. And I think we take, mutual learnings from each other. I've been loving the way that you share some of these podcast snippets out on Twitter. I know you always keep saying that, I'm new to this journey, but I think it's fantastic the way you build a story around the podcast. And I think to me, that is more important, right? When it comes to a podcast, as much as you try to, release episodes, try to have a good roster of guests and then have conceptual themes week after week. It's also the way you want to express that story. So I've always felt that the Jim Kroft's podcast has a certain unique element to it. It's because of your narrative style and your way of putting out that story. So thanks for doing that.
Aishwarya, thank you, because from my side, it just feels like pure chaos. It's like the Joker in The Dark Knight, and he's sitting and he sits down in the hospital and he's like, "Hi," and then he's like, "I am an agent of I'm an agent of chaos. Do I look like I have a plan?" You know what I mean? And I kind of feel totally like that in life, just winging it. So, but look, so that's really interesting, because obviously we have this connection on podcasting, and I'm really excited to speak about your life on a more holistic sense, and because there's so many things that you're doing. But since we're just starting on the podcasting theme, let's just have a little look at this particular area. And so one of the things so maybe you could tell us to start with about the Founders Foyer, and just give people who don't know your work or the podcast a little introduction to it. And before you do that, I'm just going to say, you've got to hear this, guys, because this is one hell of a podcast. Over to you, Aishwarya.
Thank you so much for bringing the Founders Foyer right up in the conversation. So the Founders Foyer is my side project. turned into like the greatest passion project that I've had in the recent times. And this is to do with building a space where early stage founders, builders, and creators can actually look for that kind of support and sort of more ideas for them to grow their products. So the
Mm-hmm.
backstory for me to start the Founders Foyer was the times that I did podcasting, even before what I'm currently doing now. So I started off with an audio only podcast, and that was
Mm-hmm.
called The Broadcast. And I ran that with two of my other friends in the product space.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was doing season one and season two for that podcast, I happened to connect with a bunch of product folks and
Mm-hmm.
particularly early stage founders who were always like giving out the joy of building something 0 to 1, but at the same time they were very very expressive about the fact that there were a lot of uncertainties about this ground up kind of a building product. So somewhere I think that journey was really resonating with me, where I was like, oh, so when you look at podcasts, there are always like topics around how do you come into product, like how do you break into product management, how do you break into a certain role, or
Mm-hmm.
there is
Mm-hmm.
the other extreme angle to it, which is yeah, which is basically how do you scale and how do you grow your company further. Podcasts like Masters of Scale is very great in that, where it gives you more depth or knowledge into scaling your business. But when it comes to the middle area, where hey, I have like a great idea, but I am looking for ways to build it out, but I don't know how do I start, how do I pace it out, I don't know what is the right idea for me to pick. So some of these middle or the gray area part of questions that were there didn't have like a sort of content that could resonate
Mm-hmm.
with people like you and me, Jim, where we have a lot of ideas and we
Mm-hmm.
want to build our podcast out, or we want to build our newsletter, or we want to build our product. I think I
Mm-hmm.
saw the Founders Foyer as a kind of a space that fit in this gray area, and it's kind of like saying that
Right.
hey, it's totally okay. Like all of the guests that I bring on the show are folks who have actually aced this 0 to 1 building, who have actually done something, shipped something in the past, and they have this
Mm-hmm.
knowledge about the fact that any question is a valid question, and it's there's no
Mm-hmm.
silly, there's no particularly nothing out of the grid, but everybody has questions, everybody has different styles of work. So I think the biggest idea for me through Founders For You is to expose people to that different levels of thinking. So there's also another
Mm-hmm.
another insight, if I have to particularly call it, for me to say that when people think about product or building out ideas, they always have like a very typical path towards building a product. It's like, oh, so you need to have like a product knowledge, you need to have like XYZ background to be able to ship something. But when I tell people that, hey, you know what, stand-up comedy and product building are so related, they kind of laugh it out. They're like, what, are you like really serious? Why do you think comedy would be related to it, or why do you think psychology would be related to it? So that is another myth that I wanted to break through Founders Foyer, is that I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to bring out the fact that different lens of thinking, like humor, psychology, neuroscience,
Mm-hmm.
creativity, there are like different facets to knowledge and different
Mm-hmm.
facets to thinking, and that kind of style and thinking is what would eventually help you build anything that you want, whether it's a podcast, product,
Interesting.
newsletter,
Mm-hmm.
anything. So that is another angle through which I found Founders Foyer as the perfect fit. So when people ask me like, hey, like what's your niche, I kind of tell people that versatility in tech is my niche. And as
Mm-hmm.
contrasting as it sounds, it's always the fact that I believed in the fact that there's no one path to tech, there's no one particular way to express your ideas or to get better at something. It's always great to understand various angles, various viewpoints, and then come to your own way of deciphering what really works for you. So it's like giving you multiple areas to think about, and
Mm-hmm.
then letting you take the conscious decision of, oh, so I happen to hear like ABC kind of thoughts, let me bring those together and form my opinion, which is D. So it doesn't have to be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's this kind of a 10-step process worked out for Jim, so I'm just going to like copy paste
Yep.
that into my style and then just go ahead and use it. It's not going to be like that, but it's going to be like, oh, like I heard Jim talk about how his podcasting career was looking like. I mean, he had like a certain style to it, and it's like, I know how KP did the whole build in public thing. I know how Dr. Julie Gunner talks about psychology and kind of like
Mm-hmm.
personality playing a greater role with the way you communicate and the way you share ideas.
Mhm.
Now, if I have to build a common thread along these three stories, what would I do? That's exactly what I want Founders Foyer to help people. So yeah, that's like a narrative.
I love this because in a world that's always saying niche down and that you have to sort of choose one element or aspect of yourself, what I love about your approach is I go on to you as a person, but also how you express it publicly, because I go onto your website and I just love the fact that you are not limiting yourself to one version of you, especially as someone who's got an amazing career in doing multiple different things and being a mentor for people with in product management and all the rest of it, but you're still giving yourself. So I go onto your website and I'm like, Aishwarya is doing this and she's an artist and she's got the podcast and she's in the LinkedIn top 100 creators in India, and there's all these different aspects which I'd love to jump into some of those, but I find that just a very powerful part of your message, that you are inviting all of yourself and all of the people that you're speaking within. So where did you arrive at that as a philosophy, if you like? Because it interests me, the conflict and advice between this niche down, you got to have one thing, you got to have a goal, and you got to go after this one thing, and then someone like yourself who's kind of taking, in a way, the opposite approach. Correct me if you think I'm wrong with that, but what are your thoughts on niching down and this holistic argument?
Right. First off, I think it's a great question. And I think I usually am a person who tends to do a lot of self-reflection and then try to see what's really worked out for me, or why am I getting pulled into a certain aspect of work or a certain aspect of doing something. So I would say that now looking back and connecting the dots, it could feel like, oh, like I didn't really go through a niche, but then I tried doing like a bunch of things. But I think when you're right in the flow, you wouldn't second think to say, am I going through the niche or am I like stepping away from it? Because when I started following some of these pursuits, to me it was only from the lens of, is it very interesting to me? Like, what of this feels energizing to me, and why am I like getting gravitated towards it? So maybe like I'm able to put that into words in the present time, and probably in the last couple of years of having reflected through it. But each time I think I let's say, when I got pulled into a podcast, or when I really started, like, I don't remember the time that I probably started doing art. I think it was way back when I was a kid. I think a couple of things that kept me sane as a kid was like books, reading, writing, and art. So I don't really have like a certain timeline to go back and say, oh, like this is when I started art. But I could definitely say that with each of the pursuit that kept pulling me in, the criteria that I always went by is, this is interesting to me. What if this is interesting to me, and why am I getting pulled into it? So I'll tell you like a distinction in terms of being able to do a couple of these things together. I think it definitely came as a sense of keeping that consistency through, because of course, while you grow up, you tend to be interested, or you tend to have a bunch of ideas, but you always think that you're at a loss of time, because you're like, oh, like I have X things to do. I have like a school, I have like a career, I have like, college schedules. So many things keep you like, totally tight and totally restricted with the way you think through. So I have been that person. I've been that person who always had like a bunch of things to do, and I realized that, oh, if only I had like some more couple of hours, then I definitely think I could do this. So I think that was the lens through which we all must have gone through with our work. But there was this certain point in time that I completely felt very frustrated about, like, hey, like if I see somebody like coming up with an idea or executing on the idea, I'll be like, oh my god, like that's something I really thought about. It's not like this idea has never struck me, but what was it that actually led me not to do it, like not to pursue it? And then I started thinking that let's, instead of keeping it very constrained, let me just do a small experiment. Whenever I got excited by an idea, it could be anything. It could be even like, going out and then going to a certain place and then sitting there by the park or by the beach. Or it could be a simple activity like wanting to sketch something outdoors, whatever it was. I started thinking about, okay, like let me just take the flow. Let me just go with the flow, see how much it takes me forward. So that was the first step that I did. And the step that I probably stopped at is sometimes getting frustrated about, oh, like I followed this path and I thought, I would really like this, but why am I not liking this? Why am I like feeling very, after 10 times of doing it, why am I still not getting a hang of this? So that was the next phase that I landed myself into. And that's when I think, I realized that, okay, sometimes you do a couple of things, it's okay. You don't have to like completely like it. And thanks to a few people that I also like spoke to them about, saying that, like I love following these exciting, paths. I like trying to take these exciting routes. But I always tend to also ensure that I do the best out of it. And that was also sort of one of the things that was impeding me in like enjoying the whole experience completely, because sometimes you do a few things and it might not stick with you. And that experience is absolutely okay. So I started liking or believing in the journey more than the outcome part of it. So I stopped obsessing about the outcome, and then I started realizing that, okay, let me just probably do podcasting for a bunch of episodes. Let me just see how much I go forward. If I enjoy this, I'll continue this, or if I don't enjoy this, okay, whatever I get out of it as a lesson, let me just take it that way. I think that mindset of trying and testing and understanding what really sticks with me eventually led me into doing some of these things consistently. So when I do something consistently, it's only when I find energy with it. I ensure that I don't force myself. There's a thin line of difference between discipline and then forcing yourself out. So to me, it's all about being pulled into something. Like, do I have to be it's like what one of my favorite writers on Twitter, Dr. Julie Garner, also mentions. She says, are you like pulled or pushed into it? I mean, push would work great, but then how long can you be pushed into something when you don't have a natural gravity towards something, right? So I ensured that I was always like try to have a pull into something. And that was largely what led me into doing a couple of shifts in my career. And, when it comes to career, I tell people that I believe in something called as non-linear career, because when you think you're really interested about something, just follow the natural progression of what do you think gets you into the career. Like, are you somebody who loves doing XYZ things? Then look into something that can actually elevate that. So that became like a like a norm for me to follow, or to try and test multiple of these lenses that you mentioned, which is to do a podcast, to do art, to travel, do a bunch of things together. So how am I able to do it together? To answer the second part of the question, like, do I do all of these simultaneously? As much as possible, yes. But I don't multitask. So multitask is also another myth.
You don't multitask.
I don't multitask. By multitask, I mean, I generally don't. Of course, all of us would have done this where we're like, oh, it would be great if I can do like, when I'm recording a podcast, I'm also like thinking about what is the next thing to do and like doing a bunch of things together. I am a believer of doing a bunch of things on the same day, but when I'm focusing on one thing, I tend to do it in intervals. So multitasking is very different from breaking your tasks into intervals, right? I think I'm a believer of the second method, which is to give certain intervals to whatever you do. Like, let's take a day's time into picture. I would love to work. I would also like come back and spend a couple of hours thinking about, okay, like if I'm going to be talking to a host, if I'm going to be talking to a guest on my podcast, or if I'm actually going to be meeting somebody, I would like to take the time off to plan and to schedule things based on that. So to do a couple of things on a day, yes, it's completely possible based on how you plan your schedule out, how you plan and, not just schedule, but how do you plan your energy? Like, are you draining your energy on things that are completely taking off all your enthusiasm, and then you come back to only figure out there's no more energy left? Or are you working your energy out in multiple pockets so that if you do something, you get more energy back and you're able to put that into other aspects of it, right? So I think the secondary part of the question to, how you ask, like, what makes you do a couple of these things together? I think it's the fact that when I do one thing, I have like energy that comes in. It's like a gush that just comes in, and then this entire thing can be put into another activity. So at times I feel like it's an energy loop, right, where you do a bunch of things, you get happy, and then like you keep doing that. So that's what I've found to work for me.
So there's a sort of precursor to what you're saying, because to be able to do this, if someone's listening to this and they're like, I want to be like Aishwarya, but what a lot of people feel nowadays is this problem with the actual discipline of focus itself. And we know some of those reasons. We've got all the notifications. We've got, as you say, the always the danger of multitasking or multiple different things going on. Or if stuff isn't going well for you, it's very easy to land in this fragmentation where it's like, well, what should I do? Because there's so much I could do that I don't know what it is that I should do. So I just want to go a little bit deeper into the idea of concentration in regard to your life, simply because I'm interested in it, and also because it's an area in my life that I've been working on so very much. And funnily enough, landing in very much the same place as you are, in that I am very, very disciplined about not multitasking. And I mean, I've used the Pomodoro technique quite a lot, in terms of that generally I will split my bursts of time into half-hour intervals where I'm very intense on one thing. If I know that I've got to make, let's say I'm working on a documentary at the moment, I will say, right, I will steel myself for action, and I will say, right, 4 back-to-back half hours, and that's literally putting the timer on, and there will be no internet, it's flight mode, the phone is out of there, and it's really stealing my mind. And so I've been working on this capacity for concentration. So I'm just wondering, in your life, because I feel like if you're going to live, if one is going to live in the modern world. So 2 questions. First of all, how does one deal with the distractions? And secondly, how have you developed this profound concentration that you evidently have?
Right. Yeah. I think to answer both of these questions, I would, discover some of the other facets as continuation to what we were discussing. So first off, distractions. I don't know if I could sound very controversial in saying this, but I think I actually love distractions. I mean, like, I generally tend to, like, sometimes I find distractions to be a good source of ideas. I mean, honestly,
Right.
if I have to think back, I mean, I would say distractions, again, can be categorized and can be thought about in different ways. So what I mean by distractions, to be good, is those couple of daydreams, that if I can call it. So I always say that I love daydreams because it kind of lets you just do like an unfiltered way of thinking, right? Because I think we always have this, especially if you're rooted to a 9 to 5 day job, or if you have something as a founder, as a builder, if you're working on something just rigorously, there's always like various facets of belief that we build around the business, or build around the way we think. So sometimes most of our ideas or most of our ways of thinking is very restrained or very boundaried from those lenses of saying, oh, this is right and this is wrong, and this is not falling under this bucket, so let's probably not focus on that. And various other methods of classifying and putting our thoughts through. But at times, I generally think that daydreams, the reason I call them as daydreams is because you kind of like think to any extreme of not being just filtering out your idea as you think. So at times, I'll tell you examples of how daydreams have helped me. So there are times that I would just sit and think through, okay, so why am I really interested in art? Like, what makes me get interest about it? And then there'll be like a bunch of random thoughts in my head, and then I'm like, oh, so I think it's because of this particular reason that I'm pulled into art. And wow, so only what is the other thing that I really like? And I'm like, yeah, I do love walking. I do love discovering. Whenever I travel, I love discovering new cities from the lens of walking. So I generally tend to observe a lot. And, when I combined both of that, I was like, oh my God, like, what would it look like if I'm going to organize an art walk? Like, I do art, I can also walk. What would it really look like? Then from the next time, I just thought that, oh, that's like a great idea. Let me just start doing it. So I started looking at, whenever I go to cities, I start scouting for artistic places. I start scouting for local artisans to go see their craft, to go look at what they do. And this honestly was never on my cards. This was honestly like never something that I planned out or never knew it was there.
Aishwarya, so just quickly, just tell people about what you do with the art walks, just to give them a little bit of context, because
Sure.
there's so much information in there, and it's a lovely part of what you do. So just give them a quick example of that.
Sure. So the art walks that I generally put myself through. So whenever I go to different places, which is either through passion travel, or if it's going to be even for work travel, and I have like some time with me left, I love discovering the parts of the city that are very outside of the gush and outside of what generally people look at from a very touristy perspective. So with artworks, what I try to do is look for those those cultural and those nooks and corners that are very vintage, or they have like certain stories attached to them. It's because there are local artisans, or there are like tons of like tons of other sceneries or whatever it is that was there in a certain place, and it has like a certain story to tell you at any point in time. So I love conversing with people around to understand like what if this place makes it really good, or why is it particularly known for something. And when I started focusing on that aspect through all of my travels, the walks that I did, I think I started realizing that there's a lot of things people want to convey, and the best part that you can learn is by sitting down with somebody, listening to their version of the story, listening to them talk with so much passion about what they do. So that is when I started realizing that, oh, like I enjoy art, I enjoy watching people do art, so why can't I do this in a couple of my visits, in a couple of places that I travel to. And the next part to it came that, oh, like why can't I host this as a public work where I can like take people with me. I can probably like share these stories with them, especially people who are passionate about art, who would love to hear about why a certain city is known for art, or why a certain place has a certain culture to it, certain history to it. Like there are long lost stories, so how can I bring that out? So I think this is what I technically do with art walks. And getting this back to the distraction part, I would never have probably discovered this art walk lens of mine if I had probably not used those couple of distractions, which is either getting distracted by myself to keep constantly thinking about, oh, like why is this very attractive to me, like why am I really going into this, why is it pulling me. And distractions such as, it's like when you start thinking about something, you generally pick cues and hints from things that happen around you. So also distractions that came through where, like when you meet fellow artists, when you meet people who probably share a snippet about, hey, like I just did this, or I just did like a quick sketching outdoor, and you're like, oh, like this is exactly similar to the idea that I had, so now I go back and then solidify that idea. So I feel that sometimes calculative distractions are really helpful in helping you grow a certain idea forward. And it's okay that if you're not able to execute on all those ideas, but just trying to let your mind wander, and like just trying to be very reflective about who you are, what excites you, why do you want to do something, can probably open up more doors to be able to get to that flow state, which you were saying, which is the second part of your question, right? So yeah, I do get distracted, but like I said, the question that you have to constantly think about is, which level of distraction are you like getting into? It's not that, oh, Aishwarya or Jim said distractions is good, and then you don't end up doing the work, and then you just keep getting distracted by putting off the work. So putting off the work and procrastinating is not equivalent to getting distracted. So it's very important to like clear some of these meanings out of the picture, because distraction is the way you let your mind stop focusing on something for a while and let it go in certain other directions, which can give you ideas to bring back to that scope of work that you were doing, which has tremendously helped me with product management, what I do at work, which has tremendously helped me in discovering new ways of learning or new paths for me to explore. But that is not equivalent to procrastinating. I would never say that, oh, like let me not do this job, let me not do this piece of work, and then expect all of these to suddenly magically give me like 10x results. And I can't not do the grunt work and then expect the podcast to have like 1,000 listeners or 10,000 listeners and then say, oh, this is some great job. I can't do that without putting the groundwork for it. So that's where the second part of your question comes through. How do you focus? So I think concentration to me is to be able to look at it from both the lenses. It is the lens of commitment, like the consistency that you build in terms of how effective are you able to ship something, or how much of an effort do you put into getting or showing up consistently to do a certain task. And the second part of it is it giving you energy? Like, I don't want to be doing something super consistently, but at the end of the day, if it's draining me so much in energy, like it's not giving me joy at all, there's no point in me like putting so much of work or so much of time and effort into it, because clearly it's not helping me emotionally. It's not helping me more from a psychological and from a very behavioral perspective. So those are the two lenses that I always look at in terms of concentration. To me, it's not about, at least the way I view it, is not about setting a half an hour and then saying I will not do do, like I would just do only this, but it's also looking at it from a layer above, which is, if I'm going to do this for half an hour, how do I feel at the end of half an hour? Like, do I feel forced about having done this, or is it like naturally coming to me? Is this something that I clearly enjoy doing if I have to continue for another half an hour more, or if I have to do this every single day for half an hour, what does it look like for me? So I think it's important to think about that from a couple of these lenses, so that you do know that you're signing up for something that you truly enjoy, you truly think is adding value to you as a person, and also the work that you create is also adding value to the ones who consume that work. Because if both of these are not there, then ideally, how much amount of concentration you put into work, it's not going to help both the parties, right? It's not going to help you. It's not going to help somebody who's probably like consuming that work. So this is how I view it, like from the lens of how I break down work. To me, it's getting into that flow state. And like I said, always, I love doing a bunch of things on a day. It's like how I view my day as a portfolio. I like doing a bunch of things. I generally, I generally tend to get bored with routines. So there is one phase of me that uses routine for certain aspects. Like there are certain things I'm like, yeah, I get up and I don't have to second think. It just comes to me like, yeah, I do this, do that, do this. But there are also some parts of the day I would really come back and want to plug, is because I love doing like, a couple of, it's like having a whole breakfast spread kind of a thing where, yeah, I like that. I like that also. And I like combining all of these things together. So yeah, that's how I'm naturally driven.
Well, it's very interesting, Aishwarya, because did you ever read Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I'm a huge lover of Campbell, and he talks about following your bliss, and how you were speaking really evoked this idea of really listening to yourself, following the bliss. Now, on the other hand, what I would like to ask you about, following on from the concentration and distraction question, because when you were talking about distraction, it was as about a way to tap into, let's say, the universe, or what Lennon talked about when he was really writing a good song. It would be the music of the spheres, and it would just all be happening. Funnily enough, actually, I'm just going to pop in there because it reminded me of one of your wonderful guests on your podcast, Shreyas Doshi.
Yes.
And he said, I just want to quote this, because what you were saying, it hit such a note with me about this idea of feeling and following your intuition. And he said these words that I just loved. So I was just quoting him here. It said, at some point the mind is just a channel to the universe to provide you with a creative path forward. We can call this intuition. And so in that sense, intuition is the creative language of the universe. And he said this on your podcast, and my jaw dropped. I had to rewind it 5 times. No, I've just got to write it down. And however, if someone was coming to listen to this podcast, hearing what you just said, or what Shreyas would say, now, let's say that they're not in the same space or in this moment of flow. They don't have that access to that intuition. They know that they've got something inside themselves. But for them, distraction is being distracted from self, not distraction as this capacity to listen to creative intuition. So my question would be that so many people are struggling to get to this internalized sense of hearing their self, hearing their own sense of potential, or rather they can feel it as a rumble, but it's deeply frustrating to the point of being painful. And it sort of manifests in a lot of people really struggling with their career or their mental health and so often. So if I were to come to you as someone who's not at your position, and you were to sort of mentor me or give me some advice, how do I get to that intuition that you and Shreyas were talking about if I'm not there yet?
Right. First off, I think fantastic segue with Shreyas' quote, because I'm a huge fan of Shreyas. And I think this year, one of the pinnacle moments for me with the Founders Foyer was to get him on the show. And I'm so glad that you quoted what he said. And I as well had a jaw-dropping moment when he said that, because I really believe in the fact that sometimes there are like, thousands thoughts in your head. You're like, whenever there's time for you, you kind of keep thinking about certain things, and you are at times like, oh wait, I truly believe in this. I think there is something that is telling me a certain thing, but why am I not able to put that into the right sentence? Why am I not able to like get or decipher a certain meaning through it? But you don't know that there is a quality or there is some essence to it. And to me, Shreya's penning that down was exactly the moment I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly what I believed in. But look at this. There's a person like this who has just simplified the whole belief in this thought and put that into 2 lines. And that's one of the greatest things for me. If it's Shreyas, if it's any person who can actually decipher, who can actually put the condensed version of whatever millions of thoughts that could go on in people's minds into just a succinct sentence, I think that's one of the greatest things. And which is why I think before we head over to the answer to that question, I would love to do a plug of a recent book that I am loving to read, which is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. So that's another book that I feel it's like every sentence that I read in it, it's like, oh my gosh, like this guy is really talking sense. It's like I had all of these thoughts just randomly waltzing around in my head, and look at him, he's just spreading it out in 2 lines. And reading those 2 lines is like reading 200 pages of content and then feeling so much of fullness in those 2 lines. And after reading those 2 lines, you suddenly feel so inundated. You're like, wait, like there's so much for me to take in. Like it's just 2 lines, but then you feel like the chapter is done. Like let me just go back and then reflect on those 2 lines because there's so much in it. Totally. So anyway, like that's the other funny fact that I got reminded when you spoke about how do people get to that crisp, narrative aspect of it. So yeah, Jim, getting to what you asked me, I think it's a very contextual question, I should say, because you touched upon one of the concepts that I personally believe in, which is the aspect of mental health. So especially if you are somebody, if generally creative people tend to also have the other side where they constantly, with the lens of thinking, with the lens of wanting to ship something better, wanting to work and grow their ideas, they also tend to have this side of getting overworked or getting burned down by your own thoughts, or just hitting a sort of side on the space where you don't know whether like what to look forward to, or you also clearly know you don't want to go back to. So there's this creative lull that they kind of maintain where you're like, oh, like I just feel creatively stuck, and I just don't know how do I build that intuition, or I just don't know what is it there in front of me or ahead of me. So personally, I have gone through these moments, and I still go through these moments, and I think it's important. And from a creative aspect, yes, it's important to face some of these moments because it largely broadens your perspective, and I think it also helps you discover some of the sides that you thought you never had before. So to get to that intuition, or I think intuition is a larger word, I would probably bring it down to understand if this is something that you really vibe with, or if this is something that you really want to stay interested in, or if you really want to say and pattern match with whatever is happening in front of you and say, hey, that is something I really want to go about, and this is sticking with me. I think fairly there are like certain exercises or certain things that you can do as a lifestyle habit that helps you get better with finding what sticks with you. And to me, I think that kind of a lifestyle habit was always writing things down. So I always liked envisioning myself into what I don't know I could become, but it was always like just thinking about like the daydream part that I was telling you, right? Like daydreams, it's also like trying to always try and seek to understand more about yourself. It's like trying to say, I mean, there are times that I start the year with writing down, okay, what is Aishwarya really interested in? Like what's running in her mind right now? And then I would like try to write it down. And then I keep doing this as a constant sort of an exercise where it comes very close to journaling, but it's at the same time not using a filter, not using a certain certain structure to the line and saying, oh, you have to take down notes in a certain format. Just consider it as like an idea dump where you're just trying to understand at this phase, what is it that's coming to my mind? And if you see some good inspiration around you, like try and sort out your notes into different buckets. Like you could probably have like an inspiration bucket. You could probably have like a bucket that just is unfiltered thoughts that you've always had from time to time, a bucket that probably is having the best reads that you came across in the recent times. Because I think exposing oneself to a lot of these different inspiration and a lot of these different inputs ultimately would help you build a good taste, ultimately would help you build that I wouldn't want to call it judgment, because I don't think you have to consider it very very seriously from the angle of judgment. I would simply call it with the aspect of what makes you tick is happening only when you know about yourself. And how do you know about yourself is only when you're consistently taking time off to think about why do you think the certain way that you do, or if you had to do something, what would those couple of things look like, and just imaginatively letting your mind wander, right? I think that is a lifestyle habit. Like you can start that as a couple of times of exercise, but eventually making that as a good lifestyle practice, I think would be a great start. And days when you really sulk, like days when you really think this is not helping you go forward, and you are like stuck in a creative loop, or you're stuck in a place where you face a certain block, coming back to some of these notes would be really helpful, because it'll tell you a sense of what your thoughts look like, or like what is it that you're really digging about. And the second one is, it's like as kids, when we try to expose ourselves to certain shapes, when we find that shape somewhere, we're like, oh, it's here, like this is what I learned yesterday, and look at this shape is here. It's like how you immediately do a pattern match. But somewhere when we grow up, I think we forget some of those very very little skills like pattern matching. And to me, I always look at ideas to be like pattern matching. It's like I expose myself to a lot of my own thoughts, and also a lot of looking around to say that, oh, yesterday I had this idea about an artwork, and today I see a beautiful place that actually has a certain history to it. And a week later, if I see somebody actually doing an artwork, I'm like, oh, everything is coming into a clear sense for me. It's like trying to tell me that there is a signal for me to pick up here. Now, that's the first cue that you've had. It's like, oh, there are signals, and this is in line with what I was thinking about. How was I able to find whether it's in line? It's because of that same question of intuition that you said, which I'm dumbing down to the idea of pattern matching, which is trying to say, why am I getting excited? Is because I let my mind wander 10 days ago to realize that I wanted to do something like an artwork. So now if I see that in the real world, or now if I see that happening around me, I have like a certain way to know that this is something that is exciting for me. So at times you need to tell your mind and your yourself that, hey, you were excited about this 10 days ago, and that's because you actually had this thought just passing through your mind, and then you made a note of it. So at times writing it down clearly could be as those explicit signals for you to build that conviction or build that intuition, as you said, to eventually take better decisions, or to eventually get through to understanding why do you want to do a certain thing. And the second aspect to it, I would say, is as soon as you're able to build that conviction around, it's also understanding if it works out for you at this phase of life, right? Eventually when you get better at knowing what is it that you want, or what is it that you think you could do, it's like filling 3/4 of the room and leaving 1/4 of the room to be filled in with whatever inspiration you get from outside. So that 1/4 is going to really depend upon some of whatever serendipitously opportunities could come through to you. The 3/4 is who you constantly make yourself to be. It's like some people like me believe in the whole portfolio concept, where I love doing something for a couple of months, I love exploring another facet for the next couple of months. I always decide that, okay, if it's going to be a year, I would love to see if I can probably learn how to do a certain creative work for this particular month. Let me explore and see. And it's like, oh, I did this for the next 3 months. How about doing another activity? How about attaching another way of work to learn in a different angle? So it's always trying to think about, what does this phase of Aishwarya look like, and why does she want to do this certain thing? Why is she excited about this? So I think both of these ultimately tie to the writing aspect for me, because I generally tend to write. I think by writing. So I think that was, one of the handy things that helped me, I should say personally, to get better at what I do, or at each time learn something new with what I do. So yeah, that's the answer to what you asked.
I love that you say this phase of Aishwarya, this sort of notion that we are always sort of in a process of shedding skins and sort of going from one form to another while retaining
Absolutely.
this older potential. Perhaps there's a quote that I often talk about from the Zen Buddhists, talking about the face that we had before we were born. So it's this sort of idea that it's both a going to but also a return to simultaneously, and we have this potential, but then it's about manifesting it and reaching it out. And one of the things I found very interesting about what you were talking about, because we were talking about this, how do we get to a center? How do we get to this deeper sense of knowledge and self when we've got all this fragmentation and all the distraction and all the rest of it? And one of the things I found very unexpected and interesting and and fascinating and that resonated with me was this sense, okay, right, so you're feeling a bit stuck and you're in a bit of a strange place and you're not quite sure where to go, and there's all this input. And what I liked about what you're saying, if this reflects what you're saying, but it's about this sense of auditioning different aspects at any one time, and then the way that you were sort of spotting what is hitting you in your heart, in your mind, and then linking these patterns.
Exactly.
But I think the extension of that, just for anyone who is in that space, is I think part of the thing is it's that you're opening yourself up, but you're not having to rush towards everything at the same time. Because I think that the feeling that you often have when you're in this state of stuckness or uncertainty is that you want to get out of it, but actually in order to audition these things, it's not just like, I think what you were saying, you don't just run after this one thing, this one niche. You're literally having a time when you're auditioning different aspects, because you're in a threshold, right? You're in a moment of change, and it's uneasy. And I find that very interesting what you're saying about the path out of it not being, and correct me if you hear what I'm saying is different to what you're saying, but the path out of it not necessarily being about running after one thing or panicking about where you are, but it's of sitting in the uncertainty, right? And checking out the different things. And then from there, you weave your path out of it.
Yes.
Would you say that does
Yes.
that resonate?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you did a great job with trying to condense the whole story down, because I think it's to give it in a certain phrase, I would say it's like having your anchor or having your lighthouse built in from time to time. It's not like you write it once and then let it always be there. It's constantly building that kind of an anchor or a lighthouse to come back to, and having to do this kind of a pattern matching happens when you're constantly digging deeper into who you are and what is making you do a certain thing. And then at the moment that you find like you're stuck or you feel like super overwhelmed and then you feel like there's no way out, it's also important sometimes to just use some of these anchors or the lighthouse goals to just broadly see that now you might be stuck, but you do have a sense of what exactly could have been things that motivated you or things that took you in certain directions. So to constantly reiterate that or resonate with that once again, it's a great hack, I would say, to get yourself into the habit of like self-reflecting and then writing things down, because you don't have to take an immediate action. I mean to get to that part that you summarized about, trying to look through in the different lenses or directions and seeing which one to go about. The auditioning part is great, but at times even after auditioning you might feel like I don't want to take a step forward, and that is absolutely okay. I think it's great if you don't want to take a step forward immediately, but I think the auditioning part would at least give you a sense of saying that you're only creatively stuck at the moment, but you had so many influences that you got built through from time to time, and it's not like you're starting from zero, or it's not like you're starting from nothingness, but there is a certain sense of where you did a couple of things, like let's say to just summarize it in terms of saying, when I start the year I always like write down like a loose list of things that I would love to do this year, and I would go to crazy extent of even like not thinking about whether it's possible or not, but I would just write like, okay, it'll be great if I can probably organize a heritage walk. It'll be great if I can put my art show. It would be great if I'm able to like bring in 10 guests on the Founders Foyer. It'll be great if I can actually ship something in the new product that I'm working. Just random ideas of whatever excites me at the moment. And maybe 6 months down the line, I could have only checked 3 out of those 10 or 15 goals that I've had. And that is absolutely okay, because I don't know that I've got some of those dimensions right. Like I was able to think about what could excite me at some point in time. And when I come to the 8th month, there is some serendipitous opportunity that comes my way. And I'm like, oh, wait, I was not prepared for this. So I'm just going to let you go. And I would not let that opportunity go, because somewhere I'm like, oh, wait, this opportunity seems very similar to what I had actually started this year with. I had written something on similar lines. Let me go back to that. And then you're like, oh, wait, I had actually written this down. Looks like it's an opportunity very similar to where I wanted to go at. Should I probably take this up? Is it interesting to me? Now you kind of pattern match and understand, oh, this was a dimension that was exciting for me. Do I audition for this? Yes. After auditioning, do I feel better about this? Not really. Then I think it's okay. It's okay. It's good that you tried it. You auditioned it because that was sort of somewhere interesting for you. But it's okay if it's not after you audition and you try to do something about it. So it's just the angle that you always have a sense of what makes you up and what your thoughts look like over time, instead of always having to think that you're stuck, which means you don't have any way to like look into, or any direction to look after.
I also landed with writing as well. For me, it was a long journey because as a teenager, I had a dream to be a writer, and I was obsessed with the beatnik writers, Kerouac and Ginsberg and so on. And I lost my mother towards the end of my teenage years, and the act of mortality, it came in so strong. It was like the death of ideas, and it was at this point in my life where I started sort of howling out, and that was when I came to music. But I had a sort of very sort of a very sort of damaging 20s, if you like, and then eventually I got myself into psychoanalysis, and I would literally say that I was in such a bad state that it really sort of saved my life in many ways, and it was. And but like anything else, when you go through a very deep therapy, there's a beginning and there's a middle and there's an end. And one of the things that it obviously helps it helped give me the certain tools that I brought into the rest of my life. And but one of the main things that has helped me, exactly like you say, has been writing. And I cannot also stress enough the role it's played. And funnily enough, it's for me, it's been a very emotional sort of cycle, because having it been actually my original dream, the writing has come back into my life. And I just wanted to relate to what you're saying, because to the extent that at this point in my life, where I started the podcast, I'm interested in this combination, but I don't know. I mean, my knowledge on the business side, I'm learning every time that I sort of do the podcast and meet people like you and KP. But my history is really sort of like in the creativity. But I'm at this point of change and recreation, and I just wanted to relate to that for anyone who's listening, that the writing, if you're in one of those strange points, make a discipline of writing. Following on from that, Aishwarya, do you, because I try to write every morning, and that's a habit that I've formed, especially over the last year, about being more disciplined. Do you have a discipline or a habit with writing?
Yes, I do, and I think I was getting there, and you rightfully got that question into it. So sometimes some people have like a very templated way to writing, which is trying to have like multiple systems built in, and there's this huge market for building a second brain. There are like people who are obsessed with having a certain structured or an organized way of putting things through. I think
Obsidian?
with me. Yes, Obsidian, and a lot of tools. Yeah. But I think to me, though I am like as much product obsessed as a PM or as a product builder, and I love tinkering around tools. I think when it comes to note taking and when it comes to just writing down notes, I'm very old school. Is that I follow like a combination of pen and paper, and also like the simplest tools possible, like Google Keep or Google Doc. I think that's just enough for me in terms of being able to have a habit of writing. But what I do is I love having different buckets of thoughts. So one thing that I did when I started out to organize, to me, I think as simple ways of organizing is to have a bunch of notes for different labels or different kind of thoughts that would come to me. Like I said in the middle of the call, like I have like a certain note that I always go back to whenever I have like certain loose ruminations or like musings that I've had in the times. I go back to just saying like, how do I feel about myself? Like I feel tensed, or I feel anxious, or I feel pretty cool about the day. I feel great. So I think it's more like a mood checker kind of a note where I tend to go and write anything. It's not about the fact that I went in and logged in that day. I think the intent for that bucket is not to say, have you clocked in today's mood? It's most likely to say, okay, what is that kind of a mood for me looking like over time? Like, do I constantly find like a pattern where I'm anxious, or do I finally find a pattern where I'm excited about certain things? I think there's like a category of note that goes on to just clock in what I'm feeling without any filter. And there's this kind of buckets of notes for me to add any kind of inspiration that I come across. If I find something really interesting that I read, I would go and put that there, and I would probably add like a little note on saying, why did I add that there? Like if there's like a new quote that I read, I really enjoyed it, I go back to saying, this is great, I would love to someday write an article about this. Or I would just simply put the quote and leave it. And then 10 days later, if this is still in my mind, then I think writing an article would make sense. I would go back to that note and update. Writing an article about this would be great. So I think the way you organize your notes should be the way that you are comfortable in thinking. So at times it's easy to fall into the habit of organizing it in a certain nicely structured way that probably is fascinating for 10 people on Twitter. But then if you can't find what you have written down, or if you can't relate to what you've written down as from a habit or from finding your thoughts perspective, then I think it defeats the whole purpose of writing down. So I think to me, that habit should look like, how comfortable are you to get back to these thoughts that you write? It's not a one-time write and forget kind of a thing, right? Like if you're going to come back to it, how much of that comfortable feeling do you have to come back to some of these thoughts? And the second thing would be, what is a pattern that works for you? If you are a pen and paper person, great, just stick to that. If you like a combination of physical and digital notes, then great. I think doing that is really helpful. It's like sorting it the same way that you think and your mind works is the best hack, because then you wouldn't find like you're doing work. Writing would automatically come for you. Noting down what you think would automatically come as second nature for you, as a habit for you, provided you just follow the pulse of how excited you are or what ticks you with the kind of writing style that you want to take. And I think then it becomes much more contextual to who you are as a person, instead of having to falsify a behavior around writing, because you're writing to have meaning out of it, and you're not writing. Some of these notes are not to be made into an essay or made into a great article that would be shared with 10,000 people on the net. It's sometimes just trying to decipher a sense out of what is really going on within you, or why do you want to get back to this, and then have like a certain tracking path to it. So as long as you are able to get back comfortably and you are able to relate to what you've written, I think that is the greatest form of building a habit around writing to me.
So I think that's so interesting. So the first step is you're getting into that center, and then you're having the discipline of writing. And then that leads to the sort of third point, which you also sort of mentioned, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into, which is about this activation. Because the thing is, when you're writing, as you say, some of it may remain private, but then you've got this other stuff. You've got this wedge of material and thoughts and all of that stuff we were talking about earlier that's sort of in the intuition and the creative universe. When starting to hack it and to make sense out of it and to form it and reformulate it and put it into pots and buckets, like you said. So I think that leads very interestingly onto the creator economy. And I know that you have been, you're doing so much as a creator, as an artist, as a podcaster, as well as, all the amazing things you're doing with your work and your job and working in tech, which we're hardly able to cover today. So at the moment, let's since we've got this podcast, which is between solopreneurship and creativity, let's dive into that sort of intersection and use the creator economy as our focus there. So we've got all this writing, we've got this center, and we're ready for the world. So what now? Aishwarya, like where do you see the creator economy? Let's say that I'm in this position where I'm seeing this thing and I'm seeing this kind of this huge thing out there. What the hell do I do? What's the opportunity in it? What's exciting you about it? And how do you get going?
Wow, that's sort of a loaded question.
See you in 2 hours.
Oh, totally. And
Okay, so let's break it down to that.
Yeah.
Okay, no, do your best. Dive in.
Yeah. So I'll do my best to probably break it down into a couple of parts of what this would totally entail according to what I think. So let's take the creator economy as a domain or an industry per se. I think as an industry, I'm glad there is a terminology because I think for the longest time, people did what a lot of millions of creators are doing today, but they didn't have like a certain terminology or a certain phrase to get back to and refer to. So first off, it's great that there is a recognition of a certain name or a certain indication of, like people of this kind are working in this kind of space. And that's interesting because it gives rise to familiarity. It gives rise to more people understanding and getting aware of the fact that this is there. So I think that awareness leads to more people wanting to do it, and also provides opportunity from a builder space where there are more tools, more tool builders who can get excited about building for this set of people who are excited about this space. So looking at this, the whole concept as a marketplace, I think to and fro, it's definitely advantageous because it helps both the parties. It helps people stay aware of what they're getting into, and it also helps people who are building out for these kind of folks who are in that space. I think to get to this aspect of can anybody be a creator? Yes. So I think my lens of viewing somebody as a creator or viewing myself as, I would rather stick to calling it as a creative person. And my way of viewing creativity is solely from the aspect of what is it that as value are you able to put out. So value to yourself and value to somebody who is listening to you or who's basically consuming what you're putting through. So to me, it comes down to that purpose. So I think as creators, you see a lot of people doing various couple of things. It could be a podcast, it could be a piece of art, it could be building out a tool. But I think it's also important to understand what of this creativity gets through and why people would resonate with this creativity. So that only comes down if the person who's behind scenes, who's actually doing all of this, is able to convey that purpose of them doing in a very unique way. And by unique, I mean in a way that comes naturally to them. So there are like, when you, let's say, interview YouTubers or when you interview podcast people, there's often the tendency to ask like, hey, like what makes you so unique, or what is it that makes you like a creator? It's not the fact that I have a schedule where I put content out and that's why I'm a creator. I think that would be done by any bot. That could be done by any automated tool where you go put content A, content B, content C in a scheduler and that just keeps scheduling. That does not mean that you're a creator or you are putting out a creative pursuit. I think those are mechanics of being in the creative journey. To be able to put out content or to be able to schedule content, to be able to talk to people or bring people together are all mechanics of being in the creative journey. But what truly defines the creative economy or being in this creative pursuit or being a creator is that value creation. Like what of this particular path that you're doing is making you learn something about a craft or learn something about yourself, and are you able to convey that in the best possible manner with a certain purpose to somebody who's willing to spend that time and energy listening to you or watching something that you've put out or using the tool that you've built. So it's that kind of a purpose and value tying together that I see as the benefit of being a creator and being in the creative economy. Whereas all the other things that come around, whether it's content or whether it's channels, mediums, tools, all of these are mechanics of getting that done. But the core is the purpose and the value. Jim, 1 minute. Let me just switch on my power supply, like this charge
No
of it.
problem.
I'm back.
Yeah, brilliant. So one of the things that I find interesting following on from that, you have your content pillars, if you like, and would you say that the podcast is the central pillar?
I would. So I think it comes down to trying to think about, if you take the audience that follows the tech aspect of it, then yes, probably the product that I'm building has an audience. The podcast that I'm building has an audience. So any creative work or any creative pursuit that you do has a purpose. So we started this whole podcast discussing about what is the journey of the Founders Foyer, or what is the purpose behind the Founders Foyer. I think that is the aspect of creative economy for me as a creator. And to you, Jim, it's the aspect of what made you as a musician, and why did you even want to start this podcast? Like, what aspect of this creative journey pushed you into talking to fellow creators out in the space? Why did you pull me into this podcast as a guest? Is because you see something in me that I add value. You see some aspects of my creative journey to be able to add value to another person in the audience who's listening. And I think that is the part of the creative economy that I see as pillars, or as the story. So each person brings through a different story. So how is it that in the grander scale all of these stories connect together and add to amplifying the value that comes from each of these folks who are putting out some part of their craft outside? I think that to me is the pillar.
So do you see economic possibility and potential in the creator side specifically, because you're building products as well, and you have this sort of, let's say, old school world of making a living, if you like, even though it's all new and it's tech, but let's say it's not that side isn't specifically out of the creator economy. Do you see a living and a potential and in the actual creator economy itself for yourself specifically, personally? Are you feeling excited by that? What stage do you feel you're at? And yeah, riff on that for a moment if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. I think the stage that I am in is definitely exciting, because I get to explore these different aspects of being in the creative journey. And to come to the monetary aspect of it, I think I'm just in the steps to understand, okay, I am great at what I think before we get to the economic part, it's very important to understand if you're able to get through to put that value out. So the minute there is the value creation, that you also get a signal from the market, from the audience that is following you, you have a certain conviction that, oh, this is actually adding value. The next step is to understand how do you monetize it, or how do you build an economic layer around this. So that is precisely where I am currently, to understand, oh, like this is great. And with the podcast, I recently went into sponsorships, and that was like a very new facet for me to understand. It's like, oh, so this is how sponsorships work. This is how the economic angle towards podcasting would work. And if I have aced it, no, it's just very baby steps for me. I'm just trying to learn and understand how do you position it. So that's where any kind of a learning starts. So today, if Lenny is able to earn dollars out of his creative lifestyle of building and shipping out newsletters relentlessly, of doing podcasts, and then running sponsors for the podcast, sponsors for the newsletter, having community people who pay for the community, those are great signs that this sort of a career, or this sort of a creative pursuit, definitely has an economic layer to it. It's just the angle towards, are you tapping in the right audience? And if you're tapping in the audience, is that audience finding the value from it? So I think sometimes for people, some audiences might not work, or some specific aspects of their creative journey might not work, but they could probably monetize in another angle. They could probably look for economic spirit in another angle. So it's understanding. It's like how saying that, so when people talk about building products, they often say that there is a product market fit. I think thanks to a couple of great folks that I spoke to on the podcast as well, I happen to also learn about the fact that there is something called founder market fit, where the product and the market could be great, but if you as a founder, are you this person who's supposed to be building this product? Like, the product can be great and the market could need that product. But if you are not the right person to be building that product out, if this can be built by any other person, what is the value that you are adding? Or what is it that makes it different because you are doing it? I think the same thing applies to the creative pursuit as well. It's like trying to say that the economic value is based on the value that you carry, the angle to which you bring about to saying that, oh, like this is being able to be monetized because Jim adds a certain value that nobody else is adding to this particular space, or nobody else is bringing as a differentiator to this particular piece of work.
That's just so wonderfully put, because I mean, it's interesting what I was saying about Lennon and the music of the spheres earlier. I always think as a songwriter, why does that song out in the universe, if you think of it as a platonic idea in a way, that melody yesterday, say, or whatever it is, it's out there. But it only chooses the vehicle, the person that is most receptive. If not, everyone would be writing a yesterday. So it's coming down. And I love the way that I never thought about it like that it's about becoming the vehicle. And I think that's something interesting. Like, it's about living it in such a way with such a internal authenticity, but from the outgo that your motivations are right. I mean, I was thinking about it like this, because today's the 10th episode. You are the 10th guest.
Oh wow! I'm so honored. Yeah. The lucky 10.
Woo! And it's like but the interesting thing is, I think I read. I mean, all the statistics are made up, but sort of 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. And I was wondering sort of why that is. Is it because people see the economic opportunity in podcasting first, or the self-promotional aspect first, and therefore kind of get found out where they find out how much work it is, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, to research and the energy. And so I find that very interesting how you just I find it very interesting, and it's just so it's a synergy between the marketplace, the creator, and the value that they're bringing. Really, that's so interesting. And so what about you? Because in terms of like, what are you building at the moment, Aishwarya? In terms of like, you mentioned you have the podcast, and then there's a specific product that you're building at the moment. What's that?
So I have always been in the B2B SaaS space where I build out products for fellow businesses to use. So I have, through my career journey, been a part of a bunch of products at work. And it started off with a tool in the MarTech space, where it was in the email marketing automation space, where fellow marketers can use the tool to reach out to their customers, and emails and SMSs, and sort of build their customer journeys through with the product. So then I moved on to building something 0 to 1, which was like a visual collaboration tool that helps small, close-knit teams communicate and collaborate and think together with each other in an infinite canvas, with a very creatively visual tool. The one that I'm currently working on is an event tech platform where there are like so many expos, conferences, and tech events, a lot of this being hosted across the world. How can technology and how can software enable for better functioning of these events, right? From ticketing to promotions to landing the right audience at the right place. What do you do to help enable that for event organizers? That is something that I'm presently working on. So I think I was probably fortunate enough to work at different problem statements through my product career, and each of that has got like a sense of learning for me from various angles.
It's I know we're slowly coming to the end, because I know you've had a very long day, so I don't want to take you forever. If it's okay, just to ask a couple of short last questions, just to give it a summary. Thank you.
Sure.
So I find it so interesting that so there's this idea that you build that. Let's talk about you've got the value product, whether whether it's a podcast or product, whatever. And then one of the interesting things nowadays is that the idea of you create the distribution mechanism first, and then you create the product. So let's say you're going to build a digital course, for instance. Well, it's like, yes, you could just build the digital course, but actually building the distribution, the audience first by giving lots of value for free is a very interesting way of doing it. But then you have the other perspective. Let's just riff on the digital course. The other aspect is like, well, no, you need to make the digital course to put yourself into a position of presenting yourself as authority, and that the course will help build you out the so-called distribution mechanism, which is a horrible word for an audience because obviously people follow someone for value and interest and the rest of it. But let's just talk about it in all the stuff that I'm learning about, because that side of it, the market terminology. I was a musician for years, never thought about the marketing side because I'm an idiot. But
classic chicken and egg problem, right?
Oh God, well, right, exactly. So how would you advise someone, let's say, who's a creative or creating their first digital course? I know that Justin Welsh is actually just creating a new course. What would be your advice to them? Just maybe a couple of ideas off the top of your head. If you're going to build a digital course, do you put out the value and build the audience first, or do you get on with the business of building it and worry about the audience along the way?
I think, like I was just saying, it's a classic chicken and egg problem. It's like, it's like what first time founders, early stage founders go through. It's like, do I build an MVP and then go out to get my audience, or do I get an audience and then try to build a product for them? I think I don't see, I think I picture both of these as a typical Venn diagram sort of a visual where it's important to some possible ways bring an overlap between both of these spheres, because looking at each of these as a totalistic individualistic thing to do is only going to get the equation to be very difficult. Because let's say, there's like, getting back to some of the things that we spoke at the start of the podcast, which is a tendency to procrastinate or tendency to put something off because you don't have something ready, is the primary reason why people most often don't go beyond the third in the episode for podcast or any piece of work for that matter. It's because they think, oh, like nobody's listening. Like, why would I want to create this podcast? Like, I barely had 10 listeners, or like, let's say I barely had like 5 likes in this post. Why would I go and share my knowledge if nobody's going to listen to that? So here is where I think the intrinsic drive really matters. And to me, whether or not you want to build distribution, you want to build great knowledge, you want to put out content, you want to build product, I think both of these spheres would find a common overlap only when there is an intrinsic drive. Only when you are pushed by what drives you from the voice that comes in internally and not completely externally. Because if you're going to be driven too early and too externally at the start, then you could easily give up on a lot of things that you did, which is why the podcast could just not go beyond the second episode or third episode, which is why a product would not go beyond MVP, because you're like, oh, nobody used it or nobody. So you can use some of those as signals. Like, I think to prematurely discard something because it's not landing well, it's important to use the judgment call of where to do that. Like, I mean, like if you're a great founder and if you're building something with a lot of funding, and then, with a lot of hypotheses, you find that people are not genuinely passionate about this idea, and then you go on to say, no, let me keep building and let me keep doing it because people will come. Then that's stupidity, because with a lot of these tests and hypotheses, you understand that certain parts of this is not working. At that point in time, you definitely have to step back to see that, okay, clearly something of this is not working. Then why is it that product market fit is not achieved? And that angle is different. But to come back to this aspect of, I need a course, and to need a course, I need an audience, or I need an audience, and that's when I'll go build a course, is sort of putting you as a center vehicle. And to that, I would say that sometimes is important to even show yourself of the fact that you can keep pushing things through even when external drive is not pushing you through. Because some of those intrinsic internal motivators, like a lot of product advisors today started with not charging anybody. Like, they just started with a passion to just say that, hey, I am interested about product. I deeply care about the delight value in building products. I deeply care about the craft. So I will keep sharing feedback. For example, like I beta test a lot of products. Like, founders sometimes reach out to me on LinkedIn and they say, like, it'll be so cool if you can test this and give me your feedback. Probably that started because I started as a user, whichever product that I use, I tend to send people like a complete detailed Google Doc or take a snapshot of it and then tell people, ping the founder and say, hey, I happen to use this product, I found this via Product Hunt, pretty cool stuff, like this is something I really liked about it, this is something I thought could be done better, and I just thought I can share this with you. Do I expect to get paid? Do I expect to do the fact that, oh, like, let the founder come and ask me because I'm a great product advisor, let they come and ask me? I didn't, because initially I think as a user I just wanted to share that goodwill with the team that built the product. So it's important that sometimes whatever you start as those little habits or things that you start doing without nobody telling you, or just because you're driven internally about it, are what will eventually help you build that external validation. If I had not moved beyond 10 episodes in Founders Foyer, I don't think people would have really like understood the fact that today, if somebody's listening to Shreyas, people go back to listen to Dr. Julie's episode, which is like right in the middle. People go back to listen to those first 2-3 episodes. And that happens because there's a chain effect that is built through. And it was largely because I don't want to do the short game of, is it getting too many likes? Is it not getting likes? Is it, of course, that I'm not saying that, everybody's so zen about it, right? Of course, it would bother you when a certain episode would not perform well or a certain post does not perform well. But I don't think that should stop you from having to deliver that value thing that we were talking about. I think largely getting driven by an intrinsic sort of motivation is the key to eventually bridging both of these. So to get back to that Venn diagram sort of a thing, the middle in overlap to me is that intrinsic motivation. That overlap eventually keeps bringing both of these spheres together. At one time, both will merge. So if you keep looking at it as totally two different things, then I think it's very hard to bring it through.
Well, that is just such a beautifully Aishwarya idea. And it goes back to the start, which is a good place to end, because I just love the idea that if you're building something, make it about the holistic center, know your intrinsic drive, and then it's like both are coming with you anyway, because the audience will come if you stick with it. And time is your asset, isn't it, with these things?
Yeah. Totally. Yes. Time, and I think largely the energy and time as two spaces to think about, but absolutely.
Space. Okay, well, I think we need another 3 hours to get into the time-space conundrum. Aishwarya, if I would love as a final thing just to say, if you were to give a message to the world, just a few words at the moment, especially I think if someone is a struggling artist or is just starting as a one-person business, what could you say just to give them a bit of an encouragement or just anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think I famously keep quoting about this whole build your own joy list. So it's just the fact that the things that give you joy, things that probably makes you curious, find out that curiosity, and that curiosity need not be matching with somebody else's. Like Aishwarya's list of joyful things or things that makes her curious needn't be the same thing as Jim's or needn't be the same thing as anybody else's. But I think just finding out what is making you curious and try to follow the path to understanding that curiosity would be a great call, because it'll help you find those unique you-ness in the things that you do, and eventually would help you overlap with those opportunities that you find outside, because you start knowing more about yourself. So I think the key to doing a lot of these creative things, creative activities and pursuits is knowing yourself. At least try and get to know yourself. Nobody can know oneself in the greatest possible depths, but be willing to explore those depths within you. I think that's a great first start. So I would say build a list of things that just give you joy, find out that curiosity, just see where it takes you, and then that would eventually help you figure out what you're really wanting to do. It could be a podcast, it could be a newsletter, it could simply be following a new habit, whatever it is. I think it just becomes much more related to you, because it's stemming from the aspect of getting to know yourself. So, yeah.
Aishwarya, thank you so much. It's been such a joy to get to know you personally and to feel I'm becoming friends with you, and then also to witness your professional journey. And I would love later down the line to invite you back, because I feel like I'm only scratching the surface of what you have to say. And yeah.
It was a fantastic conversation, Jim. I think, like you rightly said, it was just getting to know each other in a better way. And as we started the note on this podcast, is we got to meet each other through a creative fellowship, and I'm so glad that we took that step and definitely brought both of our paths together. So we're completely in different lines. It's still the synonymity of willing to just listen to ourselves, willing to get curious about creative aspects of life. I think that part, I'm so glad that I made a friend who's very, very similar on that note. And I loved all your questions, very, very thoughtful. And I think it made me also share a lot of things that I personally believe in. And it just gave me a chance to share that with the fellow listeners. So I hope the ones who are listening to the show also find some value that we were discussing out of what we put out. So yeah, thank you so much, Jim. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you, Aishwarya. You have a lovely evening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now. Bye.